Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the International Press Center this Friday afternoon, where the weather in Denmark is splendid. I can tell the guys who follow us online. We've been really much looking forward to hosting this election press conference today with the Socialdemokratiet Party. And indeed, we have been looking forward to welcoming Jeppe Kofod to the press center to give us an update this afternoon. And I think I can say on behalf of all the international media that it's really a gesture that's well received to get this opportunity. So we are very glad to have you here. In a minute, I'll give the floor to Jeppe Kofod. And then after that, we will go to a Q&A session that I'll try to facilitate from here, where we will take some questions from the media and the audience here, and also the people who are with us on Zoom will advise you to write your questions in the chat, and then we'll see how many of the questions we can try to get in. But I think, without much further ado, Jeppe Kofod, again, warm welcome, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, and great to be here on this wonderful autumn day in Copenhagen. So welcome to everyone here, present physically, but also people following us online, as I understand. I'm happy so many people turned up. Now we are in the final stretch of the election campaign here in Denmark with several different themes filling the agenda. And I would like to highlight some of them, but I really look forward to the interaction, the question session afterwards. As in the rest of the world, of course, this election is held on a very serious international crisis background. We have the war in Ukraine, we have energy prices rocketing, we have inflation and economic insecurity. We still have a climate crisis. We also saw yesterday the UN launching some numbers of where we are on that, very severe challenges ahead of us. But in a Danish national election campaign, it's very much also we're dealing with the consequences of the world that we are in. So the major political topics of this year's election is very much a reflection of what is happening in the world. So we have inflation and also rising prices, rising energy prices as one of the main themes. I would like to say a few words on that. What we have seen from the Social Democratic Party, my party, the government party, we have also presented several different initiatives, also during the election campaign, trying to deal with the ones who are hardest hit by the increases in prices. Also, that we can get through this winter, this next year, in a sustainable manner. We have done so in a balanced way, so as not to add unnecessarily to inflation, and that is always the challenge. What we see is inflation coming from outside, of course. It's inflation due to rising energy prices and also broken value chains and a world that is not in sync. If you look at demand in Denmark, it's not what caused inflation, but we know we have to reduce inflation. And in order to do that, we have to be restrictive. So that's why we also are focusing our help on the groups that are most in need economic help. So not just spreading out widely in the society, because if we do that, we will risk pushing inflation even higher in Denmark. And the government the Social Democratic Party has two legs in our policy. We have to be economic responsible. And on one hand, and on the other hand, we also have to be socially just. So that's the two ways of how we deal with it. The theme of welfare has also been very prominent here. In Denmark, we're seeing towards 2030 more children, more elderly people in our societies. In numbers, we will have 125,000 more elderly people over 70 years old in 2030. We'll have 50,000 more young kids between 0 and 6 years old. And at the same time, we have really a challenge in how to deal with recruiting, especially people working in the welfare sectors, working with elderly care in our hospitals, nurses, but also working with children. And that is very much the topic of the debate. For example, in this term, we have delivered money so we can hire 1,000 more nurses in Denmark, and we had that 1,000 plus nurses at some years ago, but now it's less. It's been dropping again because there's a huge challenge of recruiting healthcare staff in Denmark. So it is a big theme. If you look at what is top of mind of Danish electorates at this election, it's a healthcare system. Very much. And we have then, from the government side, from the Social Democratic Party, we have presented ideas how to recruit better, within sectors in the public welfare system where there's a challenge of recruitment. And we have to look at salaries and also working conditions in order to do that. So we have put aside 3 billion Danish kroners to allow the parties on the labor market, the unions, the employers, to see how they can address the recruitment crisis, as we call it. And part of that is also to ensure that we deliver enough money so there can be increases in salary, for example, of nurses, so they will come back to the nurses' job or not leave the healthcare sector. We have put out 7 principles on how we can solve this problem of recruitment, and as I said, through better payment and working conditions. It's also about equal payment, as we call it, because some of these public works, they are public positions. They are people are paid less than other part of the labor market, and especially when you are female, for example, you see there's an inequality in payment. So equal payment is also very important for us. In the last general election back in 2019, climate was probably the most central issue. It's not the case to the same extent this time because we have this, as I said, severe inflation, price rises, and also economic turbulence. But still, climate is still an important part of the election campaign. And Denmark, we agreed after the last election to have a 70% CO2 emission reduction target by 2030. We have come 2/3 that way in our decisions since 2019. We still lack 1/3, how to show how we reduce emissions with 1/3. And a big part of that is agriculture. And agriculture is now contributing with 1/3 of the CO2 emissions in Denmark. And if we are not doing anything to reduce CO2 emissions from agriculture, it will be half in 2030. So what we have decided and proposed from the government side is that we also need to tax agriculture and thereby collecting money that can be reinvested into agriculture to ensure the green transition of our agriculture. So we hopefully will have the most sustainable agriculture in the future. We do not want to hurt agriculture. We want to transform it into being a modern CO2 neutral, or at least very low contribution agriculture, and that is demanding that we also are putting fees on agriculture in Denmark, like we have done in the industrial sector and other sectors. So that's some of the things I want to highlight from the on the CO2 tax here on agriculture. But that's some of the things I want to highlight here on the election. One might ask, why is foreign and security policy not a big part of the election theme here? I would say it's the big background of what we're dealing with in Denmark. And frankly speaking, if we do not help our population through the difficult times, especially the most vulnerable, the pensioners, some of the people who has gas boilers at home, that is seeing an rapidly increased rise in their energy expenses, electricity prices also rised. If we do not help these people through this winter, we will have severe, I would say, economic and poverty problems, even in Denmark. And that's why what we are doing is dealing with that. Then the Social Democratic Party, and that's the last thing I want to say before opening up for questions, which is a more interesting part here. We say we want to have safe hands navigating us through the crisis that we are facing, our economic turbulence. But one thing is very important for us is when we navigate through economic turbulence, we want to ensure that we will do it in a just way where the most vulnerable groups are helped the right way. If we look at the financial crisis, for example, what we saw there, the economic crisis policy hurt the most vulnerable the most. So we want to avoid repeating or duplicating that. So that's also what we did with Corona crisis, which also hit us, all of us. That's also where we're focusing on helping the ones who are most vulnerable and ensuring that the ones who have more resources, that they will pay their contribution. And that's also why we are not in favor of lowering tax for people with the highest income. What we want to do is to lower tax on labor from the ones with the lowest income, for example. Some other parties, they have suggested to lower tax from the ones with the highest income. So there's difference here, and tax and economic policy is still discussed in that matter. At the same time, we also need to find the money for investing our welfare system. And that's also a big debate here. And that's why we're not promising big tax cuts from the government side. We are promising very limited, very targeted tax cuts for the ones who have the lowest salaries in our society. Okay, I want to stop here, and then I would open up for questions, and I look forward to interacting with you, and feel free to ask any questions you like. Thank you so much.
Many thanks for the introduction and the presentation. I think we'll now go, as Mr. Kofod said, to the Q&A, and I'll try to keep track of it from here. Some of you I know, then I'll give the introduction of the media, and if I don't do that, then please, if you could say who you are and which media or country you represent, then I think that would be helpful. But I can also already see Samuel from Sweden's radio. We'll go to you first.
Thank you very much. Mr. Kofod, you have opened up, your party have opened up to forming a centrist government after this election. Would you also agree to support a broad centrist government without a social democratic prime minister?
Well, thank you. Yes, that's true. What we said the first day when the election was called is that we want a broad government, bipartisan government, because we are facing severe turbulence economically with our security and also climate, and we want to work together like we did on the national compromise on Danish defense and security policy. We did this in late March, and it was a compromise consisting of parties: the Liberals, Conservative, we, and People's Socialist Party, and also the Social Liberal Party. So we want to have a broad government, but it's also clear for Social Democrats we are in the polls, and probably also after the election. Let's see, it's the electors to judge. By far the biggest party, and therefore our current Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen, will be our candidate for Prime Minister. And we think it's natural that the biggest party and the Prime Minister now will start forming a government after the election. And we hope that the Conservatives and Liberals will now change their attitude, because they have rejected a bipartisan government so far. But we hope that they will change their attitude so we can negotiate a broad government with our party leader, Mette Frederiksen, as the Prime Minister. That's what we were aiming for. We cannot envisage Prime Minister from a small and another party from the other side, as it looks today.
Thank you. Then we'll go to the Irish Times. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Foreign Minister. Derek Scally is my name, from the Irish Times, based in Berlin, part-time observer of Nordic politics. Two brief questions, if I may. During and after the Swedish election, the Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson said on law and order, on immigration, Sweden needs to become more like Denmark. When I visit Denmark and I look around and talk about asylum, law and order, Rwanda, I often wonder, who does Denmark want to be? And my second question is, could you explain to me in simple terms why the asylum policy, immigration policy, why Rwanda? How does that fit with the historical, traditional understanding of social democracy? Thank you.
Sure. Well, thank you. First of all, if you look at the migration policy here, it's very much, I would say, supported by partisan. So the current government, but also the conservative and liberal opposition. So that's why the theme is not actually very high on the agenda. It's not top of mind of people. We have a fair and also some will call it a tough migration policy in the sense that we want to control the numbers coming to Denmark, and we also want to reform the asylum and immigration system, because de facto it has broken down today. What we see over the Mediterranean is that human traffickers and smugglers are taking advantage of most vulnerable people that are drowning in the Mediterranean, embarking in very dangerous travels to Europe. So that we want to change. Also to be able to help the more vulnerable and especially the refugees, the ones who have refugee status. And we are in favor, my government also, on what we call quotas, where we will help taking UN refugees to Denmark, as we have done during the years. So we want to reform the system. It's not a big discussion here, because there is widely a consensus of where we want to go on this. The same goes for law and order, I would say. It's true, Denmark is a very egalitarian society. We value that all people can live, work, go to educational system, schools, hospitals, the same places, regardless of where you live and your background. So that's why we are fighting any parallel societies or neighborhoods where there's problems of gang crimes, for example. We have tough laws against that because we want to ensure that we will prevent this from involving. And that, again, there's, I would say, widely, this government, but also an alternative government, if the liberals or conservatives, will also widely share the same view on this issue. We have, in the election campaign, we have proposed some further restrictions when it comes to our law and order policy, because we still see problems with gang and gang members. And there is a link between the problems of integrating migrants and the number of gang members and gang crimes in Denmark. And also, we also, as Social Democrats, we would like to see a society where you can feel safe, where you are on the train station or you are in your neighborhood. You should be able to feel safe. That's something where we will go a long way to ensure that. So in that sense, we are tough on crime. I would also say we are very tough on the causes of crime, and that's why we value and invest in our welfare system, education, ensuring that people have an opportunity to get a good education and a good life and a good job afterwards. So in that sense, we also want to see that. And also when it comes to our housing policy, it's another important part. We don't want to see ghettos. We don't want to see that people are isolating themselves. We want to ensure that we can go to the same schools, we can live in the same neighborhoods. That's part of who we are. We want to ensure that people are treated equally and can equally live together. So in that sense, we do not tolerate the same amount of inequality or isolation as in other societies we see. And for Social Democrats, you ask me, how does it link to, in a way, our ideology as Social Democrats? It links to our ideology because we want to have a community that is working, and we do not want to give up on people. For example, when it comes to the rights of women to choose their own life, whether they want to wear a headscarf or not, it should be the individual right of the woman, not a cultural thing, for example. Things like that is something where we want to help the ones who are vulnerable, that want to live a free life. So that is very much in the Social Democratic DNA, to emancipate people, not least young women, for example, that has a challenge even in our society in Denmark today.
Thank you. I think we got a question from German newspaper.
Thank you very much. Matthias Wiesuwer, Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, Germany. how much damage is left after the Mink decision in 2020 and, of course, the Commission report this year? And does it still play a role in the election campaign or maybe afterwards by forming an election government, a new government?
Yeah, well, thank you, Matthias. Yes, at that time when we had to call the minks at the time, it was based on the reports from our scientific health authorities that were warning against having mink farming. At the same time, we have a pandemic, as we had at the time, because it could jeopardize not only it was impossible to contain a spreading of COVID in mink and people, especially in northern Jutland, but also further. But also there could be a risk to our vaccination, so to the public health, and therefore the only right thing was to follow a cautious principle, and thereby we had to kill not only the minks we already decided, but all minks, also the last ones. And you're right, it's been a big discussion, and there was a mistake done by our government that when we took the decision, we didn't know that there was not the legal basis for culling all the minks, also in the third zone. And when we found out that, we of course immediately went to the parliament and informed them about it. And there was later legislation passed with a majority in parliament, so it was legal to do it. But you're right, it's been a topic, although I would say with the crisis we are facing now, with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, with the blowing up of gas pipelines next to our sea border, with the economic turbulence we are facing, inflation, price rising, I think these themes are much more predominant. After the election, there might be some parties who want to continue to discuss this issue, but for Social Democrats, we have dealt with it. A minister had to go at the time, the Minister of Food and Agriculture, and we had also taken steps to prevent this from happening again. So that is where we are today. But I would not speculate in what happens after the election if there will be some parties who still think it's important to go further on this discussion.
Thank you, Foreign Minister. And we've got a couple of questions from our online audience, so I'll try to read them out on their behalf. We've got with us Samitiak in Greenland, and they ask, in Greenland, they say there's a majority working for Greenlandic independence. So the question is, how is a Social Democrat looking at this issue going forward?
Well, thank you so much. Well, two answers to that. First of all, it's fully up to the Greenlandic population and people how they want to deal with their future, whether they want to be independent or not. That's their sole decision. It's also the laws that regulates the unity of the realm that we have with Greenland and the Faroe Islands clearly states that as well. So that's up to the Greenlandic population. Second, what we have done, we are in a unity of the realm. We are in the kingdom together. We have worked very closely with our Greenlandic friends in the Danish government, the Greenlandic government, Naalakkersuisut, on facing some of the geopolitical and foreign and security challenges we see today. And for example, we have set up now a permanent committee between the government in Greenland, Faroe Islands, and Denmark that is dealing with common issues of defense, of security, and foreign policy. And we're meeting annually to take a stock on where we are on these issues, and also what is threatening our three respective countries, Greenland, Faroe Islands, and Denmark. And for me, as Foreign Minister, I have started in a way a whole new tradition, which has never happened in Denmark before. So, for example, when I have visits of both the current and the former Secretary of State, the former Pompeo, but also the current one. Then when we discuss Arctic issue or North Atlantic issue, I would always bring Greenland government representative and also Faroe Island representative to that meeting together. So we have, in a way, meetings on this together. So nothing about Greenland without Greenland present. Nothing about the Faroe Islands without Faroe Islands present. And it also goes for foreign and security policy. So that I can say clearly. And if we continue as a government, with Social Democrats continue, we want to deepen a respectful, mutually respectful, inclusive, and equal partnership between the three parts of the kingdom.
Thank you. With us online this afternoon, we also got Richard Milne from Financial Times, and he knows a lot about Danish politics. So he's saying, for a long time, there's been the bloc system in Denmark, blue bloc or red bloc, forming governments. So why now this message about being open for a centrist government? And then he asked, is it a way for you as Social Democrats, as possibly still the biggest party, to secure that you stay in power?
No, it's a genuine proposal, and it really came also after what we experienced with the severe security crisis to Europe and Denmark we are seeing after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, 24th of February this year. As I said, after that, we came together, the Social Democrats, the Conservative Party, the Liberals, the Social Liberals, and the People's Socialist Party, and we made a national compromise on our security. In that, we also agreed that we will spend 2% of our GDP on defense spending, and we also want to be 100% independent of Russian energy, including gas, of course. So in that sense, we also want to strengthen our diplomacy. So I think because we are in these exceptional times, we think that it will be great to have a bipartisan government. That's why we are aiming for it. But as I said, when we proposed it again in the beginning of the election campaign, it was rejected clearly, very clearly, by the Conservative leader and by the leader of the Liberal Party. So whether it's feasible right now, it's probably difficult, but we want to see this broad government in the times to reign. Whether we can maintain power or not, we'll have election day on Tuesday, and we will be ready to continue even if we cannot form a broad government with broad cooperation. And if you look at the legislation that we passed for the last 3 years plus with this government, more than 90% of all legislation in Danish parliament are passed by a broad majority, including the opposition. So we have a tradition of working together, even though we are not in government together. And in any case, we want to continue that.
Thank you. We'll go to another question from the room over here.
Thank you. Anne-Françoise Hiver, I'm the Nordic correspondent for Le Monde. I'm based in Sweden on the other side. I wanted to ask you about asylum immigration policies. You mentioned a broken system, asylum broken system. I was wondering how a center in Rwanda would help solve that, considering that the law that was passed in the parliament was mentioning people actually coming and ask for asylum in Denmark. So how is it going to reduce smugglers and risk of people dying in the Mediterranean? And I was wondering also why this center hasn't been open yet, because that was one of the priority of your government.
Yes. Well, first of all, it's very important to recognize that the current asylum and migration system is de facto broken down. It's inhuman. It is serving, as you rightly say, human smugglers. It is also, in a way, allowing a lot of irregular migrants coming to Europe that will apply for asylum, and many of them will not get asylum, and then they had to be readmitted back to the country of origin, which is difficult. Some of them are leaving illegally in Europe. So we want to deal with a broken system. And we presented 10 ideas. It will be too far to go into each of them, but one of the 10 ideas in our more fair, more human asylum and migration system is to have a reception center in a country, partner country in Africa, for example, like in Rwanda. And there, if an asylum seeker then a migrant come to Denmark, the person will be taken back to Rwanda, and the asylum procedure will be processed there. of course, according to all international obligations, including respect of all human rights, and also with the level as it was done in Denmark. And then at the time, then it can be settled whether a person is eligible for asylum or not, and then having refugee status or not. The reason why we are proposing that is that will remove the incentives for people to migrate illegally across the Mediterranean, because they know they will be returned to Africa, for example. And that will take out the business model of the human smugglers. And if I look at the numbers, it's thousands of people, including kids that have died in the Mediterranean because of this smuggling in boats that is not suitable for transporting people and so on. So it's for us, we have to do something about this. And also, if you look at the migratory pressure in the coming years, it might only go up. Today, more than 100 million people in the world live in areas where they either are IDPs or refugees, or there's de facto no state control. So we have a situation where people could, for economic reason, try to migrate to Europe and to Denmark, but their asylum application will be rejected, and then they have to be readmitted. And again, many people die on the way, not only in the Mediterranean, but also in the countries of transition. They are going through deserts, they're going through, there's a lot of reports also from the UN that migrants are being targeted as rapes or crimes against them. So we want to have another system. But then I want to say, then we want to take UN quota refugees to Denmark instead. And then what we also have done from Rwanda, for example, we have taken UN refugees there, bringing them from Rwanda to Denmark, and then also putting them in different municipalities so they can integrate as good as possible in our society. Because we also want to ensure when you come to Denmark that you are treated in a good way, so you can be integrated and be part of society with your education, with your work, where you're living, and so on. And in order to do that effectively, we need to control the numbers also coming here, frankly speaking. So that's also part of it. So that's what we proposed, but we are willing to discuss any idea that could deal with a broken system. I just want to say that just keeping the system going as it is today is not a solution. It's also bringing a lot of suffering to people, and that's why we don't want to have it. We want to propose ideas to reform the system. But again, we're open to any idea. We come out with our idea with the reception center, and let's see how it will go. We have made a memorandum of understanding with Rwanda, between Denmark and Rwanda. We are both agreeing that the intentions behind reforming a broken system is right, and also the reception center. So we will work with Rwanda, the government of Rwanda, on this. We are not done yet, but we will continue our work.
Thank you. I see a few more hands in the room. I'll get to you as quickly as I can. Just the last one from online. We've got Daniel from the Polish news agency, and he asks, what do you think would be the biggest change, I think, for the Danes or Denmark if the blue bloc wins?
That is really a good question, Daniel, because the blue bloc is not a bloc as you would imagine, because they are several very different parties, small and bigger ones. And I think what is uniting them is that they want another government. It's not what policy they want to do. So if I would answer very briefly to Daniel, we actually really don't know, because they have to agree after an election what will be the political platform for let's say, center-right or right government in Denmark. We actually don't know. They haven't come together. So yeah, I can't really give you a good idea. Although there have been proposals on tax cuts, for example, but then they don't agree whether it's the one with the highest income or lowest income. One thing is sure, that there will be a lot of, I think also a lot of negotiations after, if that bloc of parties, I will call it, win the election.
Thank you. We'll go back to the room. I saw a hand here.
Yes. Annukka Oksanen, I'm a Finnish freelancer. I would like to ask about the Russian illegal invasion. That how has it changed your and Danish views about on Nordic defense cooperation?
Yeah. Well, first of all, what have significantly changed is the threat to our security is now very close to our borders in Europe and in Denmark. And that's why we also called for the referendum to get rid of the defense opt-out. We had the referendum in Denmark the 1st of June, and with a 66.9% of Danes voting to remove the opt-out. So now we are fully part of the European security and defense policy. That is the highest yes number in any Danish referendum ever. So it also reflects that we see the threat coming out of Russia, the invasion in Ukraine, but also Russian rhetoric, frankly speaking, the Putin rhetoric, where he's talking about Peter the Great, talking about a new Russian world order, disregarding UN Charter, fundamental respect of other countries' sovereignty and territorial integrity. For us, it means that we have to invest, as I said, firstly, more in our defense, so we'll increase it to 2% of GDP. Secondly, we want to be fully part of EU policy on defense and security. And third, we want to strengthen our Nordic cooperation on this. We now see Sweden and Finland fully entering NATO, and thereby the 5 Nordic countries will be NATO countries. And if you look at all of the countries around the Baltic Sea, they will be NATO members, except of Russia, of course. And therefore, we see this as an opportunity to deter any security threats to us if we work better together. And for Social Democrats, if I may draw one historical point here, if Denmark and Norway were part of founding NATO back in 1949, at the time there was a discussion whether to make a Nordic defense union, and that failed. But it was under a Social Democratic government as well. We decided to join NATO with Norway, and Sweden and Finland went another way. Of course, Iceland was also part of it. But now, more than 70 years later, we now are united again. And that gives us a lot of opportunities as Nordics to work on security together. It's no secret we share a lot of values, our welfare states, and so on, but also on security, we now are together in a way that where Denmark wants to, as I said, invest in this. I could deepen it, but I want to say, especially around the Baltic Sea, but also in the Arctic, we see that this Nordic cooperation will be very important in the coming years.
Thank you. I saw Osama next, please.
Well, my name is Osama, and I'm working for Jordan News Agency and other Arab media outlets. My question is one question regarding your foreign policy toward Middle East. How do you see the prospects of achieving peace between Israel and Palestinian? Do you believe in two states model? That's one part. The other part, would Denmark agree to choose moving its embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, as other allied countries did?
Well, first, I must put a disclaimer. I mean, we are not, in this election campaign, we are not discussing the conflict in the Middle East, really. And our position, it goes across different governments, right-wing or center-left governments. We want a two-state solution. We want to ensure that we can end the occupation. We want to ensure that a Palestinian state and Israeli state can live side by side peacefully within international recognized borders. So we're supporting any attempt to do that and move in that direction. That's really important. And looking also of great concern of some of the settlement activities happening at the moment, for example. But I don't want to go into all details about our Middle East policy. I just want to say that, no, we don't want to, I mean, our embassy is in Tel Aviv, and it's the Danish embassy, and it will remain so. We have no plans of moving the embassy to another location.
Thank you. And I think we got the local, Michael.
Yeah, Michael Barrett, the local Denmark. You mentioned in your presentation labour shortage in the health and social care sectors. I read recently that a rural municipality, Lolland, has recruited some staff from abroad, from EU countries, to work in those sectors. Is that something that the Social Democrats would be interested in doing on a broader scale after the election? And does that fit? Does that better align with the Danish labour model than government-driven pay rises?
You were talking about allowing foreigners to come and work in Denmark, just to be clear.
Yeah, specifically to address the labour shortage in health and social care.
Yes, we actually put out a plan with concrete steps from the government side, from Social Democrats, how we also on the short term can deal with the recruitment crisis in our healthcare sector, and that also where we also want to, in a way, allow more people to come from outside to work as nurses or doctors in our healthcare system. But the problem, as I said, is actually that we have a problem of maintaining, for example, nurses in the public healthcare system. They are now working in Norway. They are now working for private companies. That is now, and then they work at public hospitals after. But they are joining private companies instead. What we want to do is to ensure that it's attractive enough to be in the public healthcare system. And in order to do that, it's both about working conditions. You need to have sufficient number of colleagues, so you feel that you can fully use what you were taught to work with as a nurse or as a doctor. And secondly, it's also about salary, and that's why we put aside 3 billion Danish kroners that we want to discuss with the labor market partners, the unions and employers, and us as state, as tripartite cooperation, how we can strengthen the recruitment within our public healthcare system, where there is a huge challenge of recruitment. And as I said earlier, with 125,000 more elderly people above 70 years old towards 2030, we will have a big challenge if we cannot recruit the healthcare staff. Then our welfare state, our welfare society, which we are so proud of, will start to fall apart, frankly speaking. So it is, for Denmark, it is now one of the most important challenges if we want to continue to have high quality in our healthcare system, for example. You were talking about Lolland, southern part. We have, I think, 600,000 people in Denmark today that are at risk of losing their, what we call family doctor, because they live in rural areas outside the bigger cities where it's very hard to have a family doctor because no one is there. So we are ready to look at more incentives to put family doctors out in all parts of Denmark. We are also looking at we have put aside 4 billion Danish kroners to open up till 25 what we call local hospitals, not specialized hospitals, but more local hospitals around the country. So instead of people have to travel long distance to get treatment or after treatment, they can have it near where they live. We also know it's very important to improve the access to healthcare and also to limit the inequality in healthcare, which we see very much in Denmark too, that people living in the capital, for example, their healthcare conditions are much better than the ones living in the rural areas, partly because access to healthcare is very different. So that's why healthcare, I think, is top of mind of Danish electorates. If you measure it, it is top of mind. So we have proposed a lot of ideas. It would be too far to go into all details, but that's some of the details, and including also recruiting from abroad to Denmark.
Thank you. I think we've got one question from French media, and then we'll go to the Finnish newspaper afterwards. But Thibault, first, go to you.
Thank you very much. Thibault Savary from Pictorium Agency. Denmark is a strong defender for freedom of the press. As we now have a new Prime Minister in the UK, is there an open door for Denmark, which is a strong country for these kind of values, to negotiate the release of Julian Assange, which is actually detained in Belmarsh in jail?
Well, I don't know that question, but I think I can just say to you that we are a huge defender of freedom of expression and freedom of speech in all of our interactions in Denmark and abroad. And when I entered as foreign minister in 2019, I also launched a more value-based foreign policy, including trying to fight more actively for these principles on, fundamental democratic principles. It means freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, freedom of press, fundamental democratic rights, equality of men and women, things like that, and justice. And we will continue to do that. In the European Union, for example, we are the ones who's advocating the most rule of law, and all countries has to follow rule of law, which is signed up to, including Hungary and Poland, for example. And we are supporting the Commission when there is infringement trials linked to that. So we will be a country fighting for what we see as fundamental democratic values in a world where these values are under pressure.
Thank you. We've got another Finnish journalist this afternoon, so please.
Yes, Rickard Nordgren from Hufvudstadsbladet. I'm the Nordic correspondent based also in Stockholm. Norway is seeing a lot of drone flying around airports, around gas and oil installations. Is Denmark experiencing some kind of hybrid warfare as Norway is now?
As you have seen in the Danish press, there's also been reports of drone flying in Danish sea territory and around energy installations in the North Sea, for example. So yes, we are very carefully looking at this in strong collaboration with Norway and other of our partner countries. As we also had the deliberate explosion of the gas pipelines in the Baltic Sea, just next to our sea border. So we are taking this very seriously. And that's also why when we are investing, we decide to invest 2% of our GDP in defense. We will also invest in capabilities that will enable us to have even better surveillance and also deterrence in Denmark. And it's a whole new situation because for many years, since the end of the Cold War almost, what we have been used to is to have expeditionary forces around the world, and the Balkans and Iraq and Afghanistan and other places. Now we need to also to be able to, very near our border, to have much better surveillance and other measures to counter that. I can't go into the detail, but we are very concerned about critical infrastructure, not only in Denmark, but in Europe. And Russia, for example, is known for hybrid warfare, both in cyberspace and also other places. And we have to prepare ourselves for countries, authoritarian states like Russia, that could try to compromise our security in our societies. So that is something we take very seriously.
Thank you. I think we'll just have you think about, I think we can get in another question from the room, but otherwise we've got Financial Times with another question online.
Yes.
And he's asking basically two questions. Of course, there are many new parties. There's a lot of parties running this time. How would that fragmentation, as he calls it, impact any kind of possible formation of a government? And secondly, talking about the moderates, he's asking, what would you, the Social Democrats, do to win them over on the red side?
Well, first of all, I think we have now 14 parties running, a historically high number. We also have a historical high number in this parliamentary term that left their party, members of parliament, including the one who is the founding father of the moderates, which is the former prime minister of the liberals, Lars Løkke Rasmussen. And as you might also be aware, he is the only party leader that hasn't said who he wants as prime minister, whether it's the one from the blue opposition or us in the so-called red opposition. So he probably, probably he wants to be prime minister himself, but you have to ask him. But we will not. we will not try to win him over. What we want to do is to work, as I said initially, for a broad coalition government, including the Liberals and Conservatives parties. But whether it can happen after the election, we will see. But you're right, there might be a very fragmented parliament after the election. There will be some parties probably not passing the threshold of 2%, on national basis 2% to get into parliament. How many of the parties running of the 14 will not pass, I don't know, but might be a few. So let's say we'll be at least a handful of parties, two handful of parties. And it will be complicated because, as you know, in Denmark, we have a tradition now for minority government, but it has to be founded on a majority of parties support in parliament. And last time we did, in our coalition, we did a policy paper where we agreed with our support parties in parliament what we will work for and implement during this term. And I would envisage that it will be very difficult after the election on Tuesday for any government, that any majority to form a government and also to have the sufficient support of parties. So it could be a long process. It depends on how the voters will cast their vote. So it's a good question. In other countries around us, we have seen there's been a long process of forming governments. Whether it will happen to Denmark, we don't know. But you're right, a lot of parties is complicating the picture.
Thanks a lot. There's time, I guess, for one very quick question, and then that wraps it up. We'll go to Le Monde again. Just a quick question.
Yes, it's a follow-up question. Is there a risk for more political instability? You mentioned other countries. Sweden, your neighbor, has shown very high political instability the last 4 years. There is much uncertainty about the next 4 years. Is it something we're going to see in Denmark? The election came up earlier than it was planned as well.
Personally, I think we will. I mean, in Denmark, we are normally very pragmatic people. We will normally find a way. And if it's up to the Social Democrats, we will form a government as fast as possible because we have severe challenges that we have to deal with. We have a security crisis in Europe. We have inflation. We have energy crisis. We have, as I said, welfare recruitment crisis here. And there's a lot of things we have to do. So the sooner we can get back to work as government and parliament, the better it is for the population. So that will be the social democratic way into this. But how other parties will do and react, I can't tell. It's true that there was one party who, or for our supported parties, the Social Liberals, who asked us to have an election early, and now we have it. And I just hope we can form a government and a majority sooner than later.
Thank you. And I think that wraps it up for today. So, Jeppe Kofod, thanks a lot for coming. I think it's a great pleasure having you here explaining in detail, and also thanks for all the good questions. And I think with that, we'll wrap it up, and it just rests for us to wish you a great few campaign days here before Tuesday. Thanks again.
My pleasure. Thank you for the questions. Okay, thank you.